When I first read Exodus 1, I was so angry when I found out that before Esther, before the three Hebrew boys, there were two bold women who stood up against Pharaoh and said, "We don't have time for you, and we're going to serve our God, whether you like it or not." Not like that, of course, but ultimately through actions, is what they were saying. And I was like, why haven't I heard about this before? Like, why has this not been put in the Prince of Egypt? Or why haven't I heard about this in a sermon before? Because this was one of the first ways in this story that shows us how God can use our experiences of oppression and affliction to exalt us. The main books that I'm focusing on is Exodus 1, 2, 3, and then 14. The first thing to remember is that God exalts those who fear him. In the previous video I did, I talked about how people oppress what they are intimidated by. And in these few verses, we can see how Pharaoh is literally admitting to and feeling intimidated because of the number of the Israelites growing. And so to combat that, he assigns taskmasters to the Israelites for them to do work. And he decides that he's going to increase their workload. But it says that in verse 12 that the more that they grew in affliction, the more that they grew in number. These chapters showed me that just because we're facing afflictions doesn't mean that we can't grow while facing those afflictions. So at this point, Pharaoh's kind of like, well, I don't know what to do here. This is getting kind of out of hand. So since they're still growing, he then seeks to call out these two Hebrew midwives to kill the Hebrew boys. So basically his instructions is, hey, if you see these male babies being born, then I want you to take them out. So two midwives ended up not doing it. And Pharaoh says, why didn't you kill them like I said? And they were so clever and they had the audacity. Audacity doesn't even do it justice. The repartee, I looked that up online, to stand there and to tell the truth. They say true to themselves by saying, hey, like our Hebrew women are different and the babies are born before we get there. We're just built different. They did that because they feared God. And so because of that, number one, Pharaoh left them alone. But on top of that, they were able to be exalted by God and he gave them a household. Notice how Pharaoh, even though these women were able to honor God, he still found a way to execute killing the Israelite boys. And so that's to say that even if there are situations where you were able to overcome affliction and something is to happen again where you're faced with the same situation of affliction, just don't jump right into blaming yourself. We are in a spiritual war, right? And in one area, when you overcome something, the enemy, in this case it was Pharaoh, but Satan in our lives might see us overcome that situation and say, oh yeah, I'm going to come back harder. But that doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. Another way that God can exalt us in the midst of affliction is by sharpening our wisdom or our ability to think on our feet. Even though the midwives made their attempts to try to preserve the lives of the Hebrew boys, Pharaoh got crafty and said, yeah, you know what? I'm going to find another way and feed them to the ocean. So what Moses' mother did was she made a basket so that she can keep her baby alive. So she was able to use wisdom and sharpening her skills of, okay, what do I do in this situation? Even though it's affliction, I can still figure out how I can make this work or try to make it work. Let's just give Moses' sister a round of applause for how brave she was to even go up to Pharaoh's daughter and recommend her mom as a caretaker. She is being a part of a legacy that is taking the steps to preserve a nation of people and to preserve a leader who is going to lead her and her people out of bondage. That's amazing. This is what can happen when we try to take matters of affliction into our own hands and try to resolve it without God's guidance. So after Moses' life is spared, we now see a situation where Moses sees an Egyptian really beating on a Hebrew worker and he kills him, which is kind of crazy. And it says when nobody's looking, so this was deliberate. In counseling, one thing that we learned about is how within our world of emotions, there are primary emotions like anger, fear, sadness. There are also secondary emotions, which are emotions that are underlying those primary emotions. So looking at this story, I thought of that. I believe that compassion was his secondary emotion, or how he reacted was based in anger. It's a perfect example for how we often, as humans, are more complex. Sometimes what we think is just anger can actually stem from compassion and feeling passionate about not wanting your people to be hurt, not wanting your people to be harmed, because that's one of you. The next day, he tries to break up a fight. And basically, the two Hebrews are like, what? Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian? They're kind of blackmailing Moses, which isn't funny for him, but it's kind of funny now. And so Moses is like, oh, well, let me get out of here. I like my life. Pharaoh now wants to kill Moses because it was known that he killed one of the Egyptian taskmasters. Here, one of the themes that I noticed was trying to get revenge through revenge. You kill one of mine, I'm going to kill you or kill one of yours. Does that kind of sound familiar? Because to me, it sounded like how a lot of gang violence and retaliation operates. This goes to show that this isn't really a part of what God wants. This isn't really the best way to deal with affliction. Even though we might make a mistake and try to take affliction into our own hands, God can take what didn't work out good and He can give us a second chance. Another way that God might want to exalt us in a situation of affliction is by letting us know that God actually cares about us and is willing to journey with us through our moments of anxiety. After Moses flees from Egypt, we see him, and he's now married to Zipporah. And he encounters the burning bush and is in conversation with God. And in this case, God reveals to him, like, hey, I'm about to send you to Egypt and I want you to free the Israelites. So notice how Moses is saying, who am I to help deliver the people from Pharaoh? Okay, well, fine, if you want me to go, but then what do I say? What do I say when they ask me this? Or what do I say when they ask me that? Sometimes when you feel anxiety, it can be in the form of internal symptoms, but sometimes anxiety comes up in the form of questions like, what do you mean? Or what do I do? Because I wasn't expecting this. Even though a lot of times God is portrayed to be somebody who's so mean, a commander, or demanding, I feel like in this story, God is doing an amazing job at showing how He can help co regulate or just help calm somebody down who's feeling really anxious. God is actually offering a blueprint of what to say. They're going to say that we don't believe you, or who are you? You're going to reply saying this. Pharaoh might not listen. You're going to reply saying this. This is what's going to happen. And for somebody who has anxious tendencies, when somebody gives you a blueprint for something, when they work with you to try to figure out, okay, how can we do this together? These are our options. Would have been so much more helpful than a simple response of, oh, you'll get through it. Oh, you'll be fine. So through this, God is exalting Moses by helping him unlearn his anxiety and comforting him throughout the process. God also can exalt us when we're being afflicted by finding ways to defend our honor. When God tells Moses to say, this is the God of Jacob, the God of Isaac, the God of Abraham who has been sent to you, and this is a memorial to you in all generations. Giving Moses these words, he's letting the Israelites know that this man who is telling you, hey, follow me, this person isn't a dictator. This person isn't some random, person out the desert who came out of nowhere. Like giving him those words, he's defending the honor of Moses, so that they can know that what he's saying is true and that what he's saying is valid, and they're not going to be overly disrespectful to him in this moment. But just using Moses as an example to come and lead them out of bondage. He's also defending the Israelites' honor by modeling for them what it looks like to have a leader who identifies as their own. One thing that you can ask yourself is, how can I look at this situation of affliction that I'm in, and how can I reframe it to see how God is using it to defend my honor or to defend His honor? One of the ways that God wants to exalt us in the midst of our affliction is by fighting for us. When verse 8 or verse 9 says that they were able to leave because of boldness, that's because they felt emboldened and they felt empowered by God. But then Pharaoh is released, or when Pharaoh comes out, because he's like, not on my watch, and he tries to go and get them back, the Israelites kind of freeze up again. And they're like, you should have left us to die. One of the responses that Moses gives is, the Lord will fight for you and you shall hold your peace. When Moses says that, God is like, why are you crying out to me? Like, it's kind of an interesting response. So I don't know if maybe Moses was trying to get validation from God based on what he said, or if he wanted God to be like, yeah, you get 2 extra points for, defending my name. But God is just like, why are we still talking? Part the waters, don't even worry about them. And so then he responds by lifting up the staff, parting the waters, and then him and the Israelites are able to now cross the Red Sea. Sometimes we think that we can take on the situations and we might complain throughout it and say, oh, I should have just stayed in the situation, or I should have just let this scenario go and not spoken up about it. That's kind of maybe equivalent to what could be happening with the Israelites in this story. God wants you to know that He will fight for you, like in this affliction. Do your part and He will do the rest. In certain situations, you might experience affliction because God wants to use us as a testimony of His power. In verse 18, it says that then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, and I will have honor over Pharaoh and his horses and his chariots and his horsemen and everybody. God is using this source of what was affliction to show Pharaoh, I am who is to be honored at the end of the day. Another thing is that a lot of times when it seems like we're going through affliction alone, often there are things that God has going on behind the scenes of our lives we might not be able to see. Moses' sister going to recommend her mom as a caretaker, that was in the midst of affliction, and that was God working behind the scenes. God worked behind the scenes even when Moses committed murder and had a setup for him so that he was able to work for Jethro, because that's what it's going to take to encounter the burning bush. The second takeaway is that God is so powerful and so great that He can take something that was once a symbol of affliction and He can completely give it new meaning. If you remember at the beginning of the story of Moses, he was named by Pharaoh's daughter Moses because he was being drawn from the water. I imagine that in that moment, water might have symbolized desperation and dependency, because his mom and his sister were desperate to try to find an answer, and they had to depend on Pharaoh's daughter in order to spare his life. But what does God use in the end to help him liberate his people? Water. He literally raises up his hand and shows power over that water through God, and the whole ocean separates. So he's taking something that symbolized desperation of wanting to keep your baby alive and affliction of not knowing what to do, and he rewrites it and changes that symbol to turn it into something new. And I hope that this can serve as a means of encouragement for you to know that God is with you during your affliction. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below, and stay amplified.